glad I got both of you guys on, because both of you know I say what's on my mind. I piss everybody off. I'm not on any president or former president's Christmas card list. And it's because I say what I... And Stuart, I just want to go to you. I've spent a lot of time. I hear these people going, oh, well, we've seen this for the past 2-3 years and da-da-da. There are all these reports and the media should have reported this. The media reported. Listen, Stuart, if I'd gone in and talked to the president, which I've done a lot, if I've gone in and talked to the president and I saw anything like this, I'd tell people the next day. I'd tell the president this. I'm so sorry, Mr. President, but this isn't working. But, you know, as I've told viewers here many times, I sat with him 2-3 hours, had conversations with him late at night, had a conversation with him late at night this week. Never seen anything that gave me pause, which I guess, though, asks the bigger question, what happened last Thursday night and what should the Democrats do about it?
Well, you know, you make a really good point. Republicans meet with President Biden all the time. And if they were coming out of these meetings and they could credibly say, well, he seemed lost, he wasn't there, they would be saying it. But what happened? They thought the guy was going to be so good in the debate that they were pre-spinning that he was on drugs. So right. This just doesn't all parse. Look, I think he had a very, very bad debate. I've been involved in a lot of debate preps that, you know, once they start to go south, they go south. It was the wrong time to have a bad night. Okay, it's June. Now you move on. You know, I don't want to get all reality-based here, but, you know, the last time that a White House held on to the party without incumbency was 1988. No president has ever lost re-election with unemployment numbers like these, with an economy this strong. I think that if everybody just takes a deep breath here, and on the other side, you have a guy who is calling for the trial and conviction for treason, of which the penalty is murder, for the daughter of a former Republican vice president and former member of Congress. And everybody who's supporting Donald Trump is an accomplice to that. It is absolutely outrageous that Republicans are not out there defending Liz Cheney and calling out Donald Trump for this extraordinary accusation and call.
Right. And by the way, again, we've said here, and I certainly said last Friday after the debate, that Joe Biden needed to consider the possibility of getting out of the race, that there should be time. The president should be given the time to make that decision. I think they're still going through that process right now. And again, we should sit back, give him time to make the decision. That said, though, Jen Palmieri, again, it's fascinating that Republicans are so concerned about this and, just melting down over it. When, in fact, they've got a guy that has talked about the trial for treason and the execution of Liz Cheney, talked about executing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, talked about being a dictator from day one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got Joe Biden. Bad night, terrible night, worst night in debate history, no doubt about it. And at the same time, over the past 3.5 years, strongest economy in the world, strongest dollar in 50 years, lowest unemployment in 40 years, strongest alliances in NATO, in the history of NATO. And I could go on and on and on. I don't mind them being offended and deeply disturbed by what they saw last Thursday night with Joe Biden. Right. I'm just curious why they aren't as disturbed by a guy that says he's going to go around and try for treason all of his political enemies and enemies in the media and even generals.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats, we wring our hands. We've been accused of being too soft. But we don't. I think when the fact that on our side we're taking a moment to say, oh, OK, what happened here? Interested to see the ABC News interview tonight and how the president does there, how he does in the campaign. There's the big NATO summit next week to put Thursday night in context and understand what we're really dealing with here. That's the responsible thing to do. And then on the other, and I think it really just it brings to the fore it's beyond hypocrisy, but the real danger from the Republican side about them it really brings into relief what they do and continue to prop him up. I mean, the military tribunals thing about Liz Cheney, That is, given the Supreme Court ruling on immunity, Justice Sotomayor's dissent, where she talked about, all the things that he might be considered to do and considered official acts that he would be immune from. I'm actually terrified by it.
Well, everybody should be. Cheney should be, and everybody else that he's threatened. Mark Milley, the general who's given his life to this country. A lot of people in the media who he's threatened said he's coming after. Got a good reason to be concerned. Reverend Al Stewart, as he always does, brings up some great points. One is, I forgot, the Republicans were so concerned that he was going to turn in a good performance, President Biden. So concerned that they're talking about him being on cocaine, Mountain Dew, Red Bull. I don't know. Somebody probably said he's crushing up Adderall, going to snort it, because time and time again he'd gotten the best of them, got the best of them in the last couple State of the Union addresses. And even the Wall Street Journal article, which of course they're patting themselves on the back, but there was a story to write about Joe Biden, but they didn't write that story. They went to a guy, Kevin McCarthy, who said on this certain date that Biden was great. And he was great in the meetings, and that he was told his staff members that Biden was a tough negotiator. Again, all of this blanking Monday morning quarterback, the press should have done this, the press should have done that. Okay, well, if I had a story, I would have told everybody here. If the Republicans had a clear story, if the Wall Street Journal had a clear story, they would have quoted somebody other than Kevin McCarthy, who actually contradicted what he told his own staff earlier. So, again, it's not to say last Thursday night wasn't a disturbing night. It was. But I guess the question is, what does Biden need to do to explain away Thursday night? And what does he need to do to move forward with the confidence of Democratic thought leaders and political leaders like you, as well as the elected officials in the party?
I think he needs to do what he's beginning to do today. He needs to go back out to the American people. He's going to Wisconsin today. He's doing the interview with Stephanopoulos. He's going to have a rigorous, they reported out from the campaign, he's going to have a rigorous schedule. He needs to let the American people see him and know that he's fine. I think that what is so disingenuous is not only the Wall Street Journal story, which clearly contradicts what had been said in the past by Kevin McCarthy to his own staff, is Democrats saying, well, this is not just a one-off thing. There's been signs before. Well, then why didn't you tell us about these signs before? I mean, where did these signs come from? And as you said, the Republicans were telling us he was high on something and high energy. Nobody warned this was coming. So all of a sudden, Stuart, we get all of these people that said, I saw something wrong after the fact. None of them said this before the fact. Democrats who are now running for the hills, some Democrats, donors, some, and the Republicans. I've been around the president as much as any, body that leads a civil rights organization. I've never seen any signs. So, Stuart, where do these signs come from, and what responsibility did the people that sought these so-called signs have to have told us this before a bad debate?
Yeah, look, I mean, it seems to me there's something sort of odd here. The question is Joe Biden qualified to be president? Now, that was a fair question in December 2020. Who knows? You never know about somebody who's elected president. Will they be up to it? But here we are. We're over 3 years into this, and what do we have? We have probably the most successful first-term president since World War II. We have a guy who put together an international coalition that is about the business of saving the world in Europe and Ukraine. We have someone who has passed these bills that all of these Republicans are running on now. I mean, here's a serious question. Is there any Republican running for re-election who is running an ad or talking about a bill that they voted for? I don't think so. They're all up there. This is great. Like J.D. Vance saying that the Infrastructure Act that did the cleanup of the lakes is the best accomplishment that he has, and he voted against it. So, look, I've been involved in a lot of campaigns. People thought George Bush should get out after we blew a 65-point lead and lost New Hampshire by 19 points. I mean, you have to really work at that. But the only thing you can do is go forward and prove that you're capable. You can't talk your way out of this. You just have to go forward and do the job, and people will calm down.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.